Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Human beings have very short lifespans. We're here and gone in the blink of an eye. So much has happened before we were even born. We come into it as largely a ready-made world. The places we live, the people we live around, the very words we speak. We didn't create or establish or cause any of it. It was all here long before we got here. So how are we to understand the world that we live in if we don't know anything about it? Well, that's where history comes in. History is a compass. It teaches us where we've been, and it's the best indicator of where we're going. But there's one catch to history. It only works if people have access to the information, and even then, only if it's accurate. Since time immemorial, dictators and oppressors have always understood that the best way to keep people subjugated for the long term is to erase their memory, to turn an entire people into a blank canvas. That way the oppressors can imprint or paint onto that canvas any identity they want. They can tell you anything, and you have no means to dispute it because you literally don't know any better. So the oppressors have always sought to prohibit the teaching of anything that threatens their power. Whenever some group of invaders goes into an area, they immediately target the academics and the historians. Those are the first ones that they want to wipe out because they represent the institutional knowledge of a people. And with the people's knowledge base dead or otherwise neutralized, the oppressors can go ahead and start telling the newly subjugated people any lies that they want. Why, things have always been this way. We've always been in charge of you. And by the way, you didn't have a problem with it. You've always liked it. Oh, there's some guys over there who are telling you that it wasn't always like this. And they're telling you that there's something wrong with the status quo that we put in place. The status quo that's always existed. Why, they're just troublemakers. Don't mind them. We wouldn't lie to you. And without a knowledge of history, what happens is the oppressors can send in their own paid rhetoricians to tell lies to the people to try to substantiate this falsehood. Or what more likely happens is the subjugated people break down into bickering and arguing amongst themselves. There's always a few fools in the crowd who want to show that they're the smartest person in the room. This is how you sow the seeds of generational dysfunction into an entire group of people. But things went wrong where the former slaves of the United States were concerned. We have been out here fighting against white supremacy so long that fighting against white supremacy, that's become our identity. We've gone way beyond conversations about what tribe in Africa did they snatch you from. This is about bringing down white supremacy. That's our identity. As far as the dominant society is concerned, that is not just dangerous, it is lethal. It's one thing if you got this group of people who decides one day that they're going to reject the identity that the dominant society tried to imprint upon them. But it's another thing entirely when that oppressed people declares that their identity, which they have chosen for themselves, is going to be to bring justice to a world dominated by evil people. That's when the white supremacists realized they had a real problem. Now, one of the white supremacists' favorite tropes has been to try to claim that progress is inevitable. Why are you guys causing all these troubles for? Why, on a long enough timeline, all of this stuff's going to get sorted out. Let me tell you something. That line about progress is inevitable, that's a bald-faced lie. Change may be inevitable, but progress is not. Don't go confusing the two. This is what white liberals say, by the way, progress is inevitable. That's your greatest confirmation that they're in league with the white conservatives, because both of them spout the same lie, not because they believe it, but because it suits the interest of maintaining the racial status quo, which the mission of the white left and the white right have always maintained. To say that societal progress is inevitable, that would be like saying personal progress is inevitable. Let's go ahead and explore that for a moment. If you were to take 10 people and observe them over the course of their lives, would all 10 of them make progress? Of course not. 2 or maybe 3 would progress, and that's being generous, but at least 2 of them would die before the others, and 6 or 7 of them would find some niche, usually a dead-end job or some other barely above subsistent lifestyle, and then they would repeat that pattern until the day they die. They would make no more progress in their 40s or 50s or 60s than they had made in their 20s and 30s. It would never get any better for them than that. And since we know that what's true for the individual is also true for the group, what does that tell us about society and humanity? Human beings are creatures of habit. It's one of man's greatest strengths, but it's also one of his greatest weaknesses. Because if dysfunction becomes his habit, that's what he's going to practice until the day that he dies. These white leftists and white right-wingers who make the empty claim that progress is inevitable, notice how they never say that when it comes to countries that they want to invade? You have never seen any of these white supremacists say that we need to leave Vietnam alone. Sure, they seem to be tipping towards communism, but progress is inevitable, so we should just stay out of it. Just wait. This will all sort itself out on its own. We don't have to do anything because progress is inevitable. They didn't say Afghanistan is harboring terrorists who attack the U.S. and they're oppressing women and girls, but progress is inevitable, so we should just wait them out. This will all sort itself out on its own. We don't have to do anything because progress is inevitable. White society has never done that. They don't believe progress, by whatever definition they use, is inevitable. Their actions show that they believe exactly the opposite. If they believe that progress is inevitable, then tell them to stop complaining, stop putting all their effort into oppressing black people. Don't worry about what we want or what we're doing because progress is inevitable. And whatever happens will all sort itself out on its own. They don't have to do anything. When they say progress, what does that mean? Well, the definition of progress from the white left is whatever makes everyone more like them. And on the white right, the definition is long as you're not doing anything that threatens their power. Either one of those counts as progress. So no, progress is not inevitable. History teaches us that. Progress, by whatever definition you want to use, only happens when people make it to happen. Think of every moment of social progress that you can conceive of. Think of any moment at all that you can remember. Doesn't matter if it's black people advancing human rights or the latest technological breakthrough. Did any of these events just fall out of the sky? Did society just accidentally back into progress unwittingly? Has that ever happened even once? Of course not. These things only happen because someone, or usually a group of people, worked to make it happen. They were determined to make it happen. And then they had to work to force it into the world. Because when you're bringing about changes, very few people will welcome it. In fact, most people will fight change because change is scary. But worse than that, human beings are creatures of habit. And change of a necessity requires people to do something other than their habit. And for most of them, that's where their fear of change comes from. Every oppressor knows that progress isn't inevitable. To say that progress is inevitable, that's nothing more than the political scientific way of saying that, oh, you don't worry about what happens in this life, you worry about the next life. Oh, you'll have it better in the next life. That's basically the humanistic equivalent of it. Progress is inevitable. Oh, sure, you're oppressed right now, but you know what? Maybe your grandchildren or your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren, maybe they will have justice, but not you. But don't worry about it. Progress is inevitable. You shouldn't do anything about it. Just let things continue as they are. Progress of a necessity requires people to bring about changes. And that actually goes against our natural impulse. As human beings, we're creatures of habit. Worse than that, most people are just sheep. And it needs to be said. Now, the dominant society certainly understands this principle. It was one of their favorite philosophers, Henry Thoreau, who said, "The mass of men live lives of quiet desperation." He was right. Most people are hamsters on a wheel, playing out the same old pattern day after day after day, just like their parents did before them. Have you ever seen one of those movies where the character lives the exact same day over and over again? Like Groundhog's Day, though there's been a number of movies, big budget and straight to DVD and cable movies that have done the exact same thing. That's what that concept is about. If you look at most people, 90% of people, their lives are the exact same thing day after day. Everybody has to be at work at the exact same time, so just like a machine, you have to be at the appointed place at the appointed time, have your clothes on at such and such a time, be on the train to work or in your car commuting at such and such a time. You have to have so much done before lunch break and so much done afterwards. And you only get a certain number of days off, which means that you're basically going to be chained to whatever your place on the assembly line or your office cubicle happens to be. Everyone's lives have been reduced to the exact same monotonous rhythm over and over and over again until the day they die. So to tell people that progress is inevitable, that's to tell the person just remain on the hamster wheel and something will change. You know, it reminds me of the movie The Shawshank Redemption. There's this scene where the oldest of the convicts in the prison miraculously gets released by the parole board. I guess they figure 60 years in prison is enough for this guy. Now, they follow him afterwards, and the old man tries to make it on the outside, but he's totally lost because he had been incarcerated for so long. The world is totally different now. And on top of that, the way that people deal with each other is much different than how they deal with each other inside a prison. After a while, the old man commits suicide. When his friends in prison hear about this, they can't understand. Why did he do it? He was free. Why would he kill himself? One inmate, played by Morgan Freeman, has to explain to the others that the man had become institutionalized. It's what happens to people when we remain in a particular condition for too long. As Red put it, at first you hate the walls, then you get used to them. But if you remain in those walls long enough, no matter how much you hate them, in the end, you're going to come to need them. Because as human beings, we're always looking for something we can depend on. Our lifespans are uncertain. Our health is uncertain. The people around us are hardly reliable. So in a world where we can't depend on anything, we can be conditioned to hold on to anything we think we can rely on, even if we hate it. The majority of people will never find their way off that hamster wheel. And the hamster wheel isn't just your workaday job. I'm talking about the mentality that you've been conditioned to have. That can be even harder to break than choosing to switch whatever occupation that you have. The same goes for society. Most societies have remained unchanged since ancient times. Their social and religious structures have remained thoroughly intact. In all of human history, there's only two examples of this having been substantively challenged: Haiti and the former slaves of the United States. That's it. Unless someone challenges the status quo, it will never change. The white supremacists know this. Every invader, every colonizer understands that as long as people remember a time before the invader seized power, then they will always be fighting an insurrection. Institutional memory is dangerous because it's when a group of people use what they know to advance their interests. But there can be no institutional memory without history. This is why since ancient times, invaders and dictators' first move has been to erase the people's memory and to install a false memory of the past. This is why even though the South lost the Civil War, they spent 30 years putting up monuments to traitors all over the country. And you have a lot of people, many of whom ought to know better, who are actually defending them. And, what a surprise, defending the principles of the old Confederacy. Cities in the North and the South wanted to make it clear that they all stood against black empowerment. Up until the 1960s, the history that the South tried to overthrow and destroy the U.S. government in order to maintain slavery, that truth had been largely erased, replaced by a lie that these were just poor, good old boys fighting for their backward way of life. But it's not just the boondocks of the dirty South where this mentality exists. Hollywood is way out west. They should have been the last place on earth to endorse or promote the Confederacy. But instead, from D.W. Griffith's KKK film Birth of a Nation to Gone with the Wind to all of these slavery pieces that Hollywood keeps putting out, we see that Hollywood was built upon anti-black racism and promoting the Confederacy. Birth of a Nation was considered by the American Film Institute to be one of, if not the most important film of all time, followed closely by Gone with the Wind, which, by the way, was the movie industry's first blockbuster. This is what happens when the enemy erases history. So when you look and see all of this hysteria over critical race theory, it's also no accident that you see all of the violence taking place as well. The bad guys realized that they took a huge L in 2020. Black people forced changes on the society and didn't need a single legislature to approve of it. What they're up against is something that operates outside of the legislative process. Well, as the old saying goes, we're going to whip your butt with a pen. That's the favorite thing the white supremacists like to do where black people are concerned. We're going to whip their butts with a pen. So that's where you see this orgy of legislation coming from. They know that a critical mass of people recognize what they're doing and wouldn't actually go along with it, except for the fact that there's this hazy idea that they should because, well, democracy can be influenced by the people, blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you something. I've always explained to you that the first law is whatever people are willing to obey. That's what the law is. If people are willing to obey something, that's the law. If they're not willing to obey it, then it doesn't matter how many laws you pass. So the white supremacists have their backs to the wall, and we're the ones who put their backs there. As far as they're concerned, they think they can put the genie back in the bottle if they can just prohibit and outlaw talking about race. Keep in mind, the stuff that you see going on in Florida, they're talking about schools, but it didn't take them long at all before they moved on to workplace and say, well, you can't do it in the workplaces either. Before it's all over, they'll be saying you can't do it in society in general. They're going to be trying it. First Amendment be damned. They don't want history class. They want white indoctrination class. They want slavery, genocide, and anti-black oppression that persists to the very day to not merely be overlooked. They want fully 90% of America's history to be erased. So they don't feel bad. Well, last time I checked, facts don't care about your feelings. These white supremacists keep saying, well, the point of history is to teach young people to love their country. Now, obviously, this is a lie, but white supremacists are liars, so there. But let's take that lying talking point that the entire reason that you study something is so that you can learn to love something. Let's apply that to other academic courses, and let's see if that talking point holds up or if it dies a grisly death. Is the point of learning mathematics to make you love numbers? Is that why people learn mathematics? So they can learn to love numbers? Is that the point of English class? To make you love the alphabet? Or to teach you to love writers? Or to teach you to love publishers? Is that the point of English class? Is the point of geology class to make you love dirt and rocks? Or to love geologists and archaeologists? What part of any mathematics, language, or geology class is dedicated to number appreciation, or linguistic appreciation, or dirt appreciation? These white supremacists don't care that their children come out of these schools illiterate. In fact, they don't even care if their children come out at all, because their children are often the victims of mass shootings, usually by someone who looks like them. Their survival isn't important to them at all. Psychological masturbation is. We've put enough pressure on them that they have now been forced to admit that the entire agenda has been indoctrination. They're at the point of panic. This is a situation that they feel is so dire now, they no longer have the luxury of tiptoeing around it or trying to use code words or beating around the bush. No, they just got to come straight up the middle. Remember what Lee Atwater said? The more abstract you become, that's how you prove that you've got power, because you don't have to sit there and say it directly. You can use abstract terms. Well, they're not using abstractions anymore. They're just coming out and saying it. Well, if the entire point of history is to teach you to love the United States, then does that mean when you learn about world history, the entire point of world history is to teach you to love the world? So that means that you should also love all of these other countries and cultures and civilizations, not be trying to change them. The entire reason that you learn world history is so that you can learn to love North Korea, so you can learn to love Iran, so you can learn to love Cuba, so you can learn to love Syria. Isn't that the entire point of learning history? We should learn history so we can learn to love these countries, because that's what history is supposed to do. It's supposed to teach you to love something. Now, sure, a lot of you will say, gee, that sounds like indoctrination. Well, you just aren't good patriots, you know. History is not supposed to be teaching you about the country's story. It's supposed to be teaching you to love the great leader. But there's also a flip side to that coin. If the entire reason for learning history is so that you learn to love something, then it serves absolutely no point to learn anyone else's history at all. It serves no point to learn the history of countries you don't like, or even ones that you do. After all, why would you want to teach somebody how great Sweden is with their socialist system? Why would you want to teach somebody how great African countries are with all of their black people? No, you want to teach patriotism. That's what history is about. It's about teaching patriotism. If you start learning about other people's countries, well, you might want to love those other countries, and we can't have that. But of course, as we all understand, this hysteria about history and race has nothing to do with learning to love America. It has everything to do with not defying or challenging white supremacy. White supremacy's power depends on racial solidarity, but it also depends upon the oppressed never substantively challenging it. Both of those factors that the white supremacists thought were cemented firmly in place are now showing serious stress fractures. So we see this all hands-on-deck panicked effort to try to figure out how do we just silence the society altogether. Now what they're waiting to see is what's the response going to be. Is the first law that the people are going to just say, you know what, we're not doing it. We see what it is that you're up to and we're not going along with it. Will that be the case, or will the people meekly comply? People see exactly what's going on. These white supremacists want everyone to live in a bubble where all you hear is that the milk of human goodness came from the dominant society, that they are the milk of human goodness, and they demand that everybody else live in that bubble with them as their servants. Well, we're not going to. We're going to burst their bubble. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Cedric Etheridge, Asha Mwamba, Big Baby Melanin, and Alexandria Victor. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.